Induction today, and that is our final inductee. Now remember, we have some other things we're going to contest, but nonetheless, let's move forward to Norm Rapp. Born in 1927, Norm Rapp was raised in an environment of tools, parts, and speed. His grandfather had been a blacksmith. His father, Gene, was a first-rate mechanic who knew how to make engines sing and flathead track roadsters perform. Turns out in the end, Gene couldn't stand idly by. Before long, he too was one of the knights of the Roaring Road. In 1923, he was competing at San Luis Obispo and on the oil dirt at San Jose, where he would emerge victorious. However, on November 11th, 1923, a crash left him unconscious and facing an ultimatum. It was time to think about a family, and therefore time to hang up his goggles. Gene soon became a Nash dealer, and by the age of 12, little Norm was peddling parts behind the counter. And now, for over 3/4 of a century, he has never stopped doing just that. Norm Rapp's first race cars were powered by gravity. In 1939, he won the Soapbox Derby in San Francisco, and a year later, he was the runner-up. He would graduate from high school in 1944 and join the Army Air Corps and put his mechanical skills to work. It was while in the Army that he saw midgets at Denver's famed Lakeside Speedway. He was enthralled. He returned to the Bay Area to find a position with Pan American Airlines. And while there, he met mechanic Larry Christensen, who also owned a midget that competed on the Bay Cities Racing Association trail. In the blink of an eye, Larry, driver Dick Loveland, and Norm were traveling to Bayshore Stadium, Contra Costa, and Santa Rosa to compete. When the car was sold, Norm stayed on. By 1948, he was participating on occasion in what BCRA deemed training races. And by the end of the year, he had purchased his first midget and had drivers of the quality of Earl Motter behind the wheel. By 1949, he had competed with the big boys and ran well enough in 1950 to finish in the 17th position in BCRA points. Nothing beats seat time. So by 1951, he picked up his first win at the Peach Bowl in Marysville, California. Now, with a taste of success, like so many drivers, he also had a case of wanderlust, and predictably, he was ready to stretch his wings. In 1952, he took a leave from Pan Am, and his intent was to travel to the Midwest and compete with John Gerber's Ford Circuit. But along the way, he scored wins in Oregon, Washington, and Utah before ever reaching Iowa, Missouri, and the rest of the Midwest. Things began to change when he began his part business out of his basement, and then several basements by 1953. So by then, it made more sense to race closer to home. In 1953, therefore, he finished in the top 10 in BCRA overall points for the first time. And as the parts business thrived, Norman leased the old grocery store across from the street in San Francisco's Excelsior District, and he eventually purchased a facility where he would proudly display relics from his father's racing career. Leading a dual life all centered on racing, Norm Rapp settled down closer to home. From 1953 to 1964, he never finished outside of the top 10 in overall BCRA points, finishing third in 1955, 1956, and 1961. And by most accounts, he had scored over 40 wins with the Tough Series. By 1965, the business was beginning to overwhelm his racing activities, so by 1967, he hung up his helmet. Well, sort of. He's been an enthusiastic and active participant in vintage racing for years. It's also important to note that Norm Rapp didn't just sell parts, he was an innovator and designer. making several key contributions to midget racing in that capacity as well. This adds one more decoration to a remarkable career in life. In 1986, he was inducted in the BCRA Hall of Fame. In 1987, he won the prestigious Walter T. Ross Award for contributions to racing in Northern California. He is in the West Capitol Speedway Hall of Fame, and in 2004, he was inducted into the Motorsports Press Association Hall of Fame. My good friend Ken Clapp shared one of the great quotes of all time, and it goes like this. On the West Coast, we have a saying, if you don't own Norm Rapp money, you're not much of a race driver. He is universally hailed as one of the good guys in our sport. Ladies and gentlemen, soon to stand before you is a living legend of midget racing. In combination with his father, Gene, who was often right beside him, he embarked upon a career that this family has been deeply involved in for nearly 1 century. All on the West Coast, Norm, by the manner in which he answers his telephone. So today, we're going to borrow that for just a moment. Vroom, vroom, vroom. On this day, Norm Rapp roars into the National Midget Racing Hall of Fame. Living legend, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Norm Rapp.
Fill up those drawers. What's that? The trophy. Oh, there you go. Easy, easy.
Keith Jones, I know he's working for Scott Rock and yeah, no, this year, the last year and a half, Keith Jones.
Let's get you back. In front and center. Norm, I take it that's the goggles and helmet of your father.
Yeah, that's true. That's from 1923, and there's still blood in the helmet from my father's skull fracture. And I used to wear it as a kid in my front room there and play race driver. And I was going to races ever since I was 2 years old.
Now that's also one of your innovations there, if I believe, that particular mask there, Norm.
Yeah, that's one of my creations, the goggle mask made for open face helmets.
How about that? That was a very popular item.
When I was working for Pan American, I designed this goggle mask. We made numerous models of it, and I tried it out on the track, and there's a lot of different things that I had to improve on. Breathing, for one, where your fog goes up in the goggle, and you can't see where you're going.
Some drivers have had that problem for years.
And sometimes there was a crosswind at San Jose Speedway on the pavement there, come off turn 4, and the old goggle would go up like that.
That's a problem too.
So we had to correct that with heavier sponge foam between. And you had to see good, so the nose piece is just a piece of solid leather, whereas in between here is sponge foam of leather on each side.
So am I suggesting that maybe some of your customers who were behind on their bills were the ones you asked to test these things out until you got them right?
No, I did all the testing.
Oh, no.
And Speedway Motors used to buy 100 at a time. In those days, we used to sell them for about $16, and now a friend of mine sold them in a swap meet for $150.
Oh, well, come on now.
A used one.
Wow. Now, Kid Clapp shared with me a couple of great stories, and one of them is he thought this is an unusual situation because when we talk about Mike, we talk about the Belleville victory, and in Steve's case, a couple of Bellevilles, HUD 100 victory, etc. But Kid thinks that one of your signature moments was actually a second place finish in a V8 60 at Bay Meadows, which was an imposing mile track, by the way. Do you remember that particular race?
Oh, very well. Certain races you remember and some you don't. I mean, I might have got in the cockpit 1,000 or 2,000 times over the years, and counting the heat races and everything, because I drove professionally for 19 years. And then there was a lapse of 15 years where I just went to the track and sold tires and fuel, like I'm still doing now, 62 years later. I used to service and still do Bay Cities Racing Association. Our association is in its 75th year, and it's the second largest and active association in the United States. ARDC being a year earlier. Yeah.
Had a pretty good florist from San Francisco named George Bignotti, who had a pretty good midget with Freddie Agabation at the controls, and someone you crossed with in a variety of ways.
You're well schooled. The introduction here was really something. Yeah, George Bignotti was a personal friend of mine. He naturally was a champion in the late 40s with Freddie Agabation, Johnny Boyd, Marvin Burke, and then George went to the Speedway. Freddie Agabation brought him along to the Speedway. He phoned up George and said, George, there's a ticket for you at the airline. Come on, we want you back here at the Speedway. So George went back to the Speedway, and he's been a legend ever since. And certainly was a friend of mine, and sorry to see him go a year ago. He was instrumental in making my cars go faster, and I helped him build 3 Indy cars in the mid-50s, 1956, 57, driven by Johnny Boyd and Freddie Agabation. And there was both seal fast specials at that time. And